Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What was supposed to be a lighthearted interview turned into one of the most shocking daytime TV moments in recent memory. Cameron Diaz came to The View expecting to share details about her new wellness platform for working mothers. She was calm, smiling, and ready to talk about balance, health, and empowerment. But within minutes, Joy Behar took the conversation in a completely different direction. Instead of asking about the project, Joy launched into sharp, personal critiques, questioning Cameron's credibility, her career choices, even her decision to step away from Hollywood. The audience gasped, the other co-hosts fidgeted uncomfortably, and Cameron, caught off guard, had a choice: laugh it off or fight back. She chose the latter. What followed wasn't just a disagreement, it was an explosion of years of unspoken tension, with Cameron pushing back harder than anyone expected, refusing to let Joy paint her as irrelevant or out of touch. The more Joy pressed, the more Cameron's calm but cutting responses left the studio silent. By the end, it wasn't clear who had won, but it was very clear that Joy Behar had met her match. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. This was a clash that will be replayed, analyzed, and debated for years.
The studio lights were warm and welcoming as Cameron Diaz walked onto the set of The View. The audience rose to their feet in applause, clapping and cheering as the actress turned entrepreneur waved with her familiar megawatt smile. For a moment, it felt like the old days. Cameron, effortlessly charming, the kind of guest everyone wanted to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, Cameron Diaz," Whoopi Goldberg announced, grinning as Cameron took her seat at the table. The atmosphere was light. Cameron smoothed down her pastel blazer and leaned into the conversation, clearly ready to talk about her new passion project, a wellness platform designed for working mothers. She dove right in with the energy of someone who believed deeply in what she was saying. "This isn't about me," she explained, her voice steady but warm. "It's about creating resources for women who feel like they're stretched too thin. I've spoken to so many moms who feel guilty when they can't do it all, and I wanted to give them tools and community to remind them they don't have to." The audience nodded along, some even clapping softly mid-sentence. Cameron had a way of drawing people in, not as a celebrity lecturing from a pedestal, but as a woman who had been there and wanted to share what she'd learned. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, intrigued. "That's so important. Women carry so much of the load, and often it's invisible. What made you decide to launch this now?" Cameron smiled. "Well, stepping back from acting gave me perspective. I realized that I was always in go mode, and when I became a mom, I knew I wanted to be present in a way that felt impossible in Hollywood. But I also didn't want to disappear. This platform lets me pour my energy into something meaningful while still being there for my family." The room hummed with approval. Ana Navarro chimed in about how Latina mothers, especially, are juggling endless responsibilities, and Cameron responded thoughtfully, nodding at each comment. It was shaping up to be a warm, insightful conversation. And then, out of nowhere, Joy Behar leaned back in her chair and cut in with a tone as sharp as glass. "But Cameron," she said, tilting her head, "why should anyone take advice from you? You quit Hollywood when things got tough. Isn't this just a vanity project so you don't fade into obscurity?" The air shifted instantly. Gasps rippled through the audience, followed by a low murmur. Whoopi's eyebrows shot up, and Sunny blinked hard as though she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. Cameron herself froze for half a beat, her smile faltering. She adjusted herself in her chair, clearly taken aback, but determined not to let the jab throw her off. "Well, Joy, I wouldn't call it quitting," she began carefully. "I made a conscious choice. I stepped away from acting to live a different kind of life, one that felt authentic to me at that time. And this platform isn't about staying relevant. It's about helping women who need support. Joy wasn't satisfied. She leaned in, her expression daring. But don't you think women need advice from someone who's actually in the trenches? A working mom with a 9 to 5, not a Hollywood actress with millions in the bank? The audience stirred again, louder this time. A few clapped in protest as though to defend Cameron. Others leaned forward, hungry for the tension they knew was about to unfold. Cameron inhaled, visibly steadying herself. Her tone softened, but carried steel underneath. I respect women in every situation, whether they're working multiple jobs or running households. I never pretend my experience is exactly theirs. But what I can do is create a space where their voices are heard and their struggles validated. That's what this is about. The contrast was clear. Joy's words had landed like a strike, but Cameron wasn't folding. She was measured, calm, and yet her eyes betrayed a flash of something sharper. Whoopi jumped in, attempting to smooth over the rough edges. Well, I think what Cameron is saying here is that support looks different for everybody. And frankly, if you're using your platform to give people tools, that's not vanity, that's service. The tension loosened slightly, but the audience still buzzed, and Joy folded her arms, unsmiling. Cameron gave a polite nod, but didn't let her guard down again. She knew the dynamic had shifted. What was supposed to be a warm discussion about wellness had just become something entirely else. And in that spark, the tone for the rest of the show was set.
The air in the studio had shifted, and everyone felt it. Cameron Diaz sat upright, her smile now tight, her hands clasped together on the table. Joy Behar leaned forward, sensing that she'd landed the first blow and clearly not done pressing. The audience shifted in their seats, the kind of restless energy that builds when people realize they're about to witness something unscripted. Joy tapped her pen on the desk, smirking slightly. Look, Cameron, I'm not saying moms don't need help, but when you come out here after years of living in Hollywood privilege and suddenly decide you're the champion of working mothers, it feels a little rich. Where were you when women were actually struggling through the pandemic or when millions were losing jobs? Sunny Hostin's eyes widened. Joy, she began, trying to interrupt, but Joy raised her voice. No, I'm serious, Joy insisted. We've had nurses, teachers, grocery workers on this show, real women who had to keep things together while risking their lives. And now Cameron Diaz shows up with a wellness platform? Forgive me if I'm not convinced this isn't just about branding. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some clapped, but many booed, clearly uncomfortable with how harsh Joy had become. Cameron exhaled slowly, adjusting her blazer like armor. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady but sharper now. Joy, with all due respect, I didn't suddenly decide to care about women's struggles. I've been listening, learning, and working behind the scenes long before today. Just because I wasn't in front of a camera talking about it doesn't mean I wasn't paying attention. And as for privilege, yes, I recognize mine. That's exactly why I feel a responsibility to use my platform for something beyond myself. The audience erupted in applause. Cameron's composure impressed them, but Joy wasn't backing down. Responsibility, Joy shot back. If you're so responsible, why not use your millions to directly fund childcare programs or affordable health care? Why do you need a whole platform with your name stamped on it? That stung, and Cameron's jaw tightened. Because this isn't about throwing money at a problem, she replied firmly. It's about creating lasting change. It's about building community and resources that empower women, not just writing a check and walking away. Money can run out. Community doesn't. Sunny jumped in again, siding with Cameron. I think what Cameron's trying to say is that it's about sustainability, Joy. One person funding something is a band-aid, but creating networks, that can outlast any one donation. The audience clapped again, louder this time. Cameron gave Sunny a grateful nod, but Joy wasn't finished. She leaned forward, lowering her voice in that way that made it cut even deeper. You know, Cameron, you talk about community, but you walked away from one, the film industry. You left. You didn't fight through it like the rest of us fight through our jobs every day. So forgive me if I have trouble believing you're suddenly the face of resilience.
The studio gasped again, louder than before. Ana Navarro groaned, rubbing her temples. "Oh, come on, Joy, that's not fair." But Cameron didn't flinch this time. She turned directly to Joy, her eyes flashing. "You're right, I walked away from Hollywood, but that was resilience. It took courage to admit that the life I was living didn't serve me anymore. Courage to prioritize my mental health, my family, my happiness. Walking away doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing a person can do." The audience thundered with applause, some rising to their feet. Joy's face tightened, clearly not expecting such a pointed rebuttal. Whoopi raised her hands, trying to calm things down, but the momentum was already rolling. Cameron leaned in, her voice firmer now. "And let's not pretend that because I left acting, I somehow forfeited the right to care about real issues. I've always cared. I just finally found a way to act on it that feels true to me." Joy tried to interject, but Cameron didn't pause. "And by the way, Joy, you've been on television for decades. You've had this platform all along. If you feel so strongly about these women's struggles, what more have you done besides talk about it?" The audience gasped loudly, with a wave of cheers following. Even Whoopi's eyebrows shot up at the boldness of the question. Joy's mouth opened, but for once, she didn't have a quick comeback. Jennifer Hudson, watching from backstage as a guest waiting to appear, was seen covering her mouth in shock, the camera catching her reaction. The studio was on fire. Cameron had flipped the script. Joy shifted in her chair, her arms crossed, visibly stung. Whoopi leaned in quickly, trying to diffuse. All right, ladies, let's all take a breath here. Clearly, this is a passionate subject." But the spark had already ignited into full flame. What was supposed to be a polished interview about wellness had turned into a battle of principles, with Cameron Diaz holding her ground in a way that few had ever seen on live television. The audience wasn't just watching an interview anymore, they were watching a fight for respect, authenticity, and credibility. And it was only getting started.
The applause from Cameron's last rebuttal lingered, rolling like thunder across the studio. Joy sat with her arms crossed, her face tight, and for a rare moment she seemed caught off guard. Cameron, meanwhile, sat taller, her breathing measured but her eyes burning with something beyond irritation. It was personal now. Whoopi, ever the peacemaker, leaned in with a cautious smile. All right, let's give Cameron a chance to talk about this wellness platform in her own words, okay? Maybe then we can all understand her perspective a little better. But Joy wasn't ready to let go. Fine, she muttered, uncrossing her arms but leaning forward sharply. Let's hear it, but I'm not buying into some glossy Hollywood version of struggle. The audience booed loudly at the jab. Cameron held her ground. She didn't raise her voice, but her words carried weight. You want to talk about struggle, Joy? Let's talk about it. Because the truth is, I know what it's like to feel invisible. Not in the same way as a nurse or a teacher, no, but in my own way. I grew up in a working-class family in Long Beach. My dad worked tirelessly to provide for us. My mom stretched every dollar. We weren't wealthy. We weren't privileged. I watched my parents burn themselves out trying to make ends meet. That's why I care so deeply about this now. I saw it. I lived it. The audience went silent, hanging on her words. Cameron's voice cracked, ever so slightly, betraying the emotion bubbling under her polished exterior. Joy blinked, her smirk faltering. Cameron pressed on. And when I got to Hollywood, do you think it was all roses? I was judged for how I looked, what I wore, how I aged. You think walking away was easy? No, it was terrifying. But I chose to honor myself, my family, and my peace of mind. That doesn't mean I stopped caring about other people. It means I finally had the clarity and strength to do something meaningful with my voice. Applause rang out, but Cameron wasn't finished. She leaned forward now, her tone sharpening, every word landing like a strike. You want to accuse me of using my platform for branding? Fine, but let's talk about how women are judged when they try to reinvent themselves. If a man leaves one career and starts another, he's called innovative, visionary, brave. When a woman does it, she's called irrelevant, out of touch, or, in your words, rich. The audience roared in agreement. Joy shifted, clearly uncomfortable under the pointed critique. Ana Navarro nodded vigorously. She's right, Joy. The double standard is real.
But Joy wasn't retreating entirely. She raised her chin, her voice harder now. "Cameron, I'm not attacking you for being a woman. I'm questioning whether this is more about you than the mothers you claim to support." Cameron's eyes flashed. "And I'm questioning why you feel so threatened by a woman choosing to step into a new role. Why does it bother you so much if I try to help? Why is your first instinct to tear me down instead of asking how you could support it?" The studio erupted in cheers and applause so loud that Whoopi had to raise her voice to be heard. Ladies, let's breathe. This isn't WrestleMania, it's The View." Laughter broke the tension briefly, but Cameron wasn't laughing. Her face was intense, her hand pressed against the table. "You know what's really rich, Joy? You sitting here questioning my authenticity while you sit on one of the biggest platforms in daytime TV criticizing people day after day. Do you ever stop to think how your words affect the women who are watching at home? Do you realize how often you dismiss women's efforts? Women who are trying, women who are stumbling, but women who are showing up anyway." Gasps filled the air. Joy's mouth opened slightly, as if she'd been slapped by the rawness of the comment. The audience broke into thunderous applause, some even standing. Jennifer Hudson, still backstage, mouthed, "Oh my God," to her producer, stunned at how far this had escalated. Sonny Hostin leaned in softly. "Cameron, that's powerful. And she has a point, Joy. Criticism is one thing, but sometimes it feels personal." Joy bristled. "It's not personal. I don't dislike Cameron. But I won't sit here and give a free pass just because she's famous. If she wants to wade into real issues, then she should expect real questions." Cameron didn't hesitate. "Questions are one thing, Joy. Undermining is another. And what you've done today, trying to discredit me before I could even explain myself, that's not tough journalism. That's bullying." The word hung in the air like a bomb. Bullying. The audience gasped, then clapped, half in shock, half in agreement. Joy's face flushed crimson. She tried to laugh it off, but the sound fell flat. Whoopi placed a hand on her arm, sensing the storm that was now fully unleashed. Cameron sat back, breathing heavily, her face still composed but her eyes wet with emotion. "I came here to talk about wellness for mothers. I didn't come here to defend my right to care about people. But if I have to fight for that right, then I will." The crowd erupted in a standing ovation, the sound so loud it rattled the studio walls. Joy looked stunned, caught between defensiveness and the growing realization that Cameron had just turned the tide in front of a live audience. The tension had reached its peak. What had started as a conversation had turned into a battle of identities, a war of authenticity and credibility, and the fire between Cameron and Joy was only getting hotter.
The atmosphere in the studio had shifted from tense to downright volatile. The audience, once lively and laughing, now sat in near silence, sensing that what they were witnessing was no longer entertainment. It was a genuine collision of two powerful personalities. Cameron Diaz leaned back in her chair, her calm composure visibly straining. "You can try to twist my words, Joy," she said, voice steady but sharp. "But what you're doing is projecting your bitterness onto me. I came here to talk about solutions for mothers, not to be dissected by someone who's determined to drag the conversation into the mud." Joy laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that cut more than it amused. "Oh, please, Cameron, don't act like you're some savior of mothers everywhere. You're a Hollywood millionaire. You hire nannies. You live in a bubble. How dare you sit here and lecture people who can't even afford daycare?" The words struck like a slap, and a gasp rolled through the studio. Jennifer, Anna, and even Whoopi sat frozen, all eyes bouncing between Joy and Cameron. Cameron's expression hardened. She leaned forward, her voice low but intense. "You have no idea what I've given up to put family first. Do you think success cancels out struggle? Do you think because I had money, I didn't feel the same fears every working mom feels when she leaves her child at home? That I didn't have nights where I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was doing enough? That's arrogance, Joy, and it's cruel." For the first time in the segment, Joy's face faltered. Her smirk twitched, but she doubled down. "Oh, please, Cameron, don't act like you're some savior of mothers everywhere. You're a Hollywood millionaire. You hire nannies. You live in a bubble. How dare you sit here and lecture people who can't even afford daycare? The tension was unbearable. Whoopi leaned forward, clearly trying to intervene. All right, ladies, maybe we... But Cameron cut across, her voice cracking with intensity. No, Whoopi, I'm not letting this slide, because this isn't about my platform anymore. This is about Joy using her seat on this stage to belittle, to tear down, to mock women who are actually trying to create change. You think you're speaking for the average woman, Joy? All you're doing is making them feel smaller, like their dreams don't matter. That's not advocacy, that's bullying. The audience erupted in applause, loud, sustained, defiant. Cameron sat upright, her eyes locked on Joy, refusing to break. Joy, rattled by the support for Cameron, fired back with venom. Do you know how many years I've spent fighting for women's rights, for equality? You've been off making rom-coms while some of us were in the trenches. Cameron's face softened, not with pity, but with sorrow. And yet, here you are, using that history to justify attacking another woman on national television? That's not feminism, Joy. That's ego. You've built a career on being sharp, but somewhere along the way you started cutting down the very people you claim to lift up. A stunned silence followed. Even Joy seemed shaken, her hand gripping her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles whitened. Anna broke the silence carefully. Cameron, Joy, maybe this is bigger than both of you. Maybe it's about how women with platforms use them, whether to inspire or to intimidate. But Joy wasn't ready to concede. She leaned in, voice laced with anger. You're not going to sit here and rewrite my legacy, Cameron. You don't get to come on The View and make me the villain. Cameron didn't flinch. You did that yourself. The crowd gasped again, louder this time, as if the line had cut through the air like lightning. Joy's eyes widened, then narrowed. For the first time, she looked like she didn't have a comeback. The camera cut to Whoopi, who pressed her lips together and muttered, "Lord have mercy." The moment hung heavy, electrified, until Cameron leaned back in her chair, her posture finally relaxing. She had said her piece. She had stood her ground. And Joy? She sat still, jaw tight, eyes flashing with a storm of emotions she couldn't disguise. The audience knew it. The co-hosts knew it. The breaking point had been reached, and nothing about this show or this relationship would ever be the same.
The studio sat in stunned silence after Cameron's final words. You did that yourself. It was the kind of line that didn't just land in the moment. It lingered, echoing in the air as if daring anyone to challenge it. Joy Behar sat frozen in her chair, lips pressed tight, her eyes locked on the table in front of her. For once, the woman known for her quick comebacks and biting wit had nothing to say. The cameras cut awkwardly to Whoopi, who leaned in with a nervous half-smile. All right, let's take a breath, folks. But the audience wasn't breathing. They were buzzing. Some clapped cautiously. Others sat wide-eyed, whispering to their neighbors. The tension had broken, but it hadn't vanished. It was like watching the aftermath of a storm, trees bent but still standing, the air heavy with the smell of lightning. Cameron exhaled slowly, as though releasing years of pent-up frustration. She adjusted the microphone clip to her dress and glanced toward the audience, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She had weathered the ambush and stood her ground. Jennifer Hudson, guest co-hosting that day, leaned forward gently. Cameron, she said, her voice soft but clear, I think what you shared here matters. It's not easy to speak up when you feel cornered. A lot of women out there watching are going to feel seen because of what you said. Cameron nodded but didn't respond. She was still riding the wave of adrenaline. Meanwhile, Joy shifted in her chair, clearly rattled. She attempted to speak, her voice cracking slightly. Look, I may have been harsh, she began, but the audience's murmurs drowned her out. It was rare to see Joy on the defensive, and the cameras caught the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Whoopi quickly stepped in. We've had disagreements before, but this one, well, it's clear it struck a nerve. Let's just remember the bigger picture.
Women supporting women. We don't have to agree, but we do have to respect each other. It was the closest thing to a lifeline Joy would get that day, but the damage was done. When the segment wrapped and the cameras cut to commercial, Cameron rose from her seat. She didn't storm out, didn't slam her mic on the table. Instead, she stood tall, smoothed her dress, and gave a small wave to the audience. The crowd erupted in applause. Not the polite kind, but the genuine, grateful kind. Joy remained seated, staring down her note cards, her face a mask that couldn't quite hide the storm beneath it. Backstage, the ripple effects began immediately. Producers whispered urgently, unsure how they'd cut the footage for broadcast. Staffers scrolled through Twitter on their phones, already seeing clips trending. The hashtag Cameron vs. Joy was climbing within minutes. By the time the episode ended, the internet was ablaze. Clips of Cameron's fiery defense went viral. One tweet read, "Cameron Diaz just dragged Joy Behar on her own show. Iconic." Another said, "This wasn't a talk show, this was history in the making." Memes flooded Instagram. TikTok edits set Cameron's "You Did That Yourself" to dramatic music. Public opinion split sharply. Supporters of Cameron hailed her as a voice of authenticity, someone who dared to confront toxic criticism head-on. Others defended Joy, saying she was doing what she always did, asking the tough, uncomfortable questions. But even Joy's longtime fans admitted she had seemed shaken, perhaps even blindsided by the strength of Cameron's resolve. By evening, the headlines were everywhere. Cameron Diaz clashes with Joy Behar in an explosive live showdown. The View meltdown, Diaz versus Behar. Hollywood star versus daytime TV veteran, who won? Entertainment pundits dissected the confrontation. Some argued it was a calculated ambush by Joy that backfired spectacularly. Others framed it as a symbolic generational clash between the old guard of daytime TV and a new wave of women redefining what it meant to speak up. But the most telling reaction came from viewers themselves. Thousands of comments poured in from working mothers, thanking Cameron for voicing what they had felt for years, that their struggles, even if messy or privileged in different ways, deserved validation rather than dismissal. The next day, Cameron released a short statement on Instagram. Against a simple white background, she wrote, "Every woman's story matters. No one should feel small for choosing their own path. Yesterday's conversation was tough, but sometimes tough conversations are the ones that move us forward." It was calm, gracious, and unmistakably confident. Joy, by contrast, remained quiet. On the following episode of The View, she addressed the incident briefly. She said, "I've been doing this a long time. I've had arguments, I've had fights, but I'll admit yesterday caught me off guard. Cameron stood her ground. I respect that, even if I don't agree with her." It wasn't an apology, but it was as close as Joy Behar ever came to conceding ground. For Cameron, the confrontation became a defining moment, not just of her career, but of her public image. She wasn't just the movie star or the wellness entrepreneur anymore. She had become a symbol of standing tall against public criticism, of refusing to be diminished. For Joy, it was a reminder that the sharp tongue that built her reputation could just as easily cut back at her. She had faced many debates, but this one left a mark. And for the audience, it was a piece of daytime television they would never forget. A moment where authenticity won over cynicism, where courage silenced cruelty, and where a single sentence, "You did that yourself," became an instant legend.